Discover how smarter project insights can lead to better project outcomes.
Hello, project people. Welcome back to a brand new episode of the Project Chatter podcast. It's always great to have you here. I'm actually introducing two guests today, which is great. We have a co-host guest because Dale has decided to ignore us this week. Mr. Marco Fresenda, how are you, sir?
Very well, thank you very much. I'm excited to be here again. And
thanks for jumping in, mate, and supporting Dale. I know he loves you. And our guest for today, obviously, we have the Mr. Glenn, the veteran. Actually, you've been here before. Glenn Hyde, how are you?
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, nice to be back.
It is good to have you back. And you know, it's funny because we always get great topics and discussions, but this one is actually always relevant. It never goes away. It gets updated, but it's always relevant. Contract discussions and discussions around NEC in particular. And you've come back today and you said, no, I'm going to share some of the problems with NEC programs. And I love that idea. And I guess just to kick it off, we do this every episode almost, is, you know, what is an NEC program or what is an NEC contract? We always set with a baseline. That always gets them going. And if you haven't checked out Glenn Hyde's first episode with us, I think it was like 31 or something like that. So do check out that one as well, where Glenn goes into detail. But what is an NEC contract, Glenn?
Okay, so very brief sort of history lesson. So NEC, its first inception was sort of 1985, and in the industry here, particularly in the UK, the industry wasn't in a particularly great place. It was a very adversarial industry. It was a lot of conflict. There was a lot of, you know, contractors were put in a cheap price to try and win the work and then try and rip the client off. Sorry, maximize potential for variations was the official line. And then it was, a very adversarial industry. So NEC tried to come up. So the new engineering contract, as it was then, tried to come up with a slightly different way of doing things. And they spent 8 years developing it. It came out in 93, the first edition. And then very quickly they realized, oh, it's good, but we got some changes we can make here. So 93 saw NEC2, and we start to saw the professional services contract as well as the NEC, the new engineering contract, became the engineering construction contract. And then they were happy with NEC2 for about 10 years. 2005, NEC3 came out. And then 2017, we've now got NEC4. So NEC is a family of contracts. So the NEC is a brand name really now. And within the family of contracts, there is a variety of contracts. So you've got term service for maintenance type work, professional services for designers, supply contracts for purchasing. But the majority sort of projects are using the engineering and construction contract. So between the client and the contractor, that's the contract, the rules of engagement between the parties. And then down the line, contractor, subcontractor, we've got a subcontract version of it as well. So I was trying to create like a slightly different way of sort of being, and it's a lot more of a sort of project management tool rather than an adversarial confrontational tool. And at the heart of it is the program. So unlike any other contract I've worked with, and you probably work with Val as well, NEC is much more prescriptive in terms of what the program should show, the fact it needs to be regularly revised and formally accepted. Because again, other contracts don't always make it clear when you revise a program, okay, what's its status? Whereas NEC has this clear discipline of regular, typically every month, every 4 weeks, revised program, and that program then becomes accepted formally by the project manager on the client side. And then that's the program that then forms the assessment of change and progress sort of going forward. So there's the edited version of an contract and the program.
Very succinct. No, thank you, Glenn. And I think that leads into a very good question that we were talking just before we pressed record around accepted programs. I mean, I've certainly been on programs. I know you have as well, Marco, where that's kind of used as a bit of a bargaining chip with either the client or the contractor. So submitting for acceptance and then not getting acceptance. Is that a successful way of managing projects? And have you seen a different kind of construct?
Was that to me or to Marco? Sorry.
Yeah, Glenn. No, it's you, mate.
Yeah. Sorry, I was just saying. You said, yeah. I don't know if Marco had said it or not. Yeah, I mean, you know, we've all worked on big projects, and it's still notoriously a problem. Seemingly getting programs accepted. I think people are getting better, and people are realizing, and clients are realizing. There used to be sort of a bit of gamesmanship where programs weren't accepted. Some of that might be down to the quality the contractor's issuing. Some of it's the project manager not wanting to accept because they're worried about what liability they're taking on. But then what does that create? If you go periods without acceptance, you've then got all of these compensation events storing up, and how do you assess them? And then neither party really knows where they stand. So this kind of discipline that NEC is trying to instill of a regular, transparent program to a good level of detail that can then be accepted between the parties as to the sort of status of where we're at, and then allowing change to be assessed against that. And as soon as you start slipping out of that sort of accepted program sort of process, things start to fall over, and you kind of get back into the old way of being, which was, well, let's leave it till the end, and we'll have a fight at the end. And how successful has that been for us in the past? Well, probably varying degrees of success, I'd imagine.
Exactly. And I love how you've been just a comment before, this is the family of contracts is actually a PM tool. And I think that's a really good point. But PMs need to really understand how these work, to appreciate all the various movements and levers, right? If you don't understand the contract and the contract structure, you're doing yourself a disservice. I was going to ask you as well, the rhythm, you mentioned it's a 4 weeks, usually it's a 4 week or an end of month cycle where these programs are accepted. I always felt when I was in that space that it was not enough time to get a program ready for the client. I felt like I was always chasing my tail. Maybe this is just normal, but I felt like by the time I got the updates and had done the analysis and got it ready, there was still things to kind of get it to a client preview or get it ready for the client. And we always missed the cutoff. And it wasn't because we didn't have enough people. It wasn't because it was just a clunky, big, one of those big projects that we talk about. It's very messy. Is there a suggestion that is 4 weeks long enough for an accepted program? I guess it is if you're mature, but is for these bigger programs where there are a lot of moving parts, do you have a suggestion or recommendation for frequency?
Well, I'd never go more than 4 weeks or monthly. And maybe, Val, if you stayed till, I don't know, maybe you stayed in the office till 5 o'clock every day, maybe you would have got a bit more done. I don't know. But the trouble is, whilst I fully understand, and, to be honest, I've I've worked on big projects, but maybe not some of the projects that you guys, the scale you've worked on. But at the end of the day, I guess you've got to look at the alternative. And whilst, it's a lot of effort to get that sort of 4 weeks ready, but if it's taking longer than that, well, first of all, how old is the data by the time it actually gets issued? And secondly, if we then say, well, okay, let's go 2 months, or even I've heard some projects saying, what about quarterly? It's a long time to go without sort of acceptance. And then if you don't get it accepted, well, then we're now 3, 4, 5 months. So if you get one program rejected, and to be honest, I think you've got more chance of getting 3 months of stuff rejected than you have got in 1 month of stuff rejected, because there's just more content to actually pick apart. Oh no, that's not right, that bit. So whilst it's very difficult, and I totally get the issue, I think the alternative is more horrifying, I think.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think you probably want to know if you're going to be rejected, get rejected on month 1, then month 2 you repair, month 3, then at least you've got some chance of getting back. But everyone's clear, and as you said, transparent of what's wrong, what's not wrong. No, that makes sense to me. And the other one we were talking about before press record as well was this reluctance to submit programs with CEs or compensation event quotations. I've also been part of this where outstanding CEs weren't included. And so you have a program, then you have kind of an outstanding backlog. And I don't know what the hesitancy is. I mean, we used to submit both, but what's your views on them?
Okay, well, there's a couple of points you raised there. First of all, there's one in terms of the age-old question, do you show or can you show non-implemented compensation events on the program? And this was always a very sort of common misconception, partly because of the NEC 3 wording. So on a revised program for acceptance, it talks about on a revised program, it's got 4 bullet points. And the second bullet point says you show on a revised program the effects of implemented compensation events. The bullet above it talks about you show the actual progress achieved against each operation and the effect upon the remaining works. Some people took that line to think, well, it says you show implemented compensation events, therefore you can't show non-implemented. Now that goes against the line above it. So that isn't actually what it meant. And all that actually meant was if you've had a CE implemented, agreed within the period, well, you can now move completion date by the agreed amount. That was all that line was actually there to do. So I think it's quite healthy that NEC4 has deleted that line altogether. So to take away that misconception, maybe. Trouble is, the odd person has now said, oh, you can't show implemented anymore either. No, that's not by deleting it. That's what they've taken that to mean. So thankfully, that's very few and far between. Yeah, so I think that bit's cleared up, that yes, you do show non-implemented, but the point is you only show the effect against plan completion. And then as and when you have the CE agreed, then you can move the completion date. And I think we talked last time about the importance of the separation of the plan completion and the completion date milestones. And I've written various articles and bulletins on that as well. So that's something your sort of viewers, listeners can catch up on. So that's one thing in terms of implemented CEs. Absolutely, they should be shown. They have to be shown on the program. Otherwise, you're not showing reality. The other point you sort of raised was this seeming reluctance to issue programs with compensation and quotations. And clause 62.2 actually really intimates, it kind of gets across the message that, 62.2 talks about you've got to show the effects of the compensation event against the accepted program. And the best way of doing that is obviously with a program, and the guidance notes really sort of lend you towards that. But I'm doing training nearly every day. I'm doing training to organizations. And when I do a program workshop, which I do quite regularly, and I always ask people in the sort of chat, I say, right, a lot of QSs, a lot of project managers on the call, just tell me what percentage would you say of your compensation event quotations have a program that go with them? And it does vary. The highest number I think we get is 50 or 60%. More often than not, often there's some very quick zeros, because they say, well, yeah, we don't. And there's a lot of 5 to 10s. There's a few that say 10 to 20. I think a couple of them are probably a slight overestimation. But the tendency seems to be that it's like, yeah, sort of 10, 20% maybe, if that, of quotations actually have programs that go with them. And often I then say, well, how do your CEs take a while to get agreed? Yeah, they're always a nightmare. They take weeks, they take months. So why not give that sort of clarity? So if you give a program that clearly demonstrates why you're claiming 2-3 weeks prelims within your quotation, if you've got a program, that goes a very long way to convince the project manager, oh, okay, I don't like this, but I can see why that is true. And as long as the costs are relative to that, well, okay, we can argue over the money now, but I can kind of see the time element, is there. So actually, I think the number should be probably 60-70% in terms of which compensation event quote should have a program that goes with it. I guess people it's fairly obvious, I guess, if the end date's moving out, okay, maybe we need a program with that. But even if the end dates are moving out, maybe it's affecting an access date or a key date or a subsection of the program. But if it's affecting the program in some ways, then there should be a program that goes with it, if nothing else, just to show there's no impact on the sort of plan completion. So yeah, there is a reluctance. Also, some people seem to think, well, would that become the accepted program if the quote's accepted? Again, no. You're not issuing a program with the quote for acceptance of the program. You're issuing the program to help them understand the quote, which they can then accept or at least assess themselves. So yeah, I think it's a misconception, not a misconception. It's just something that's just not done. It's hassle. But if it was done, then it might pave the way for these CE quotes actually being agreed quicker. So definitely something we should be better at as an industry.
Which didn't, I have actually two questions. One is a more technical one, and it might be that it's me which is struggling with it, and the other is a bit more philosophical one. The first one is on the performance baseline, and what I mean with performance baseline is, I come, for example, from oil and gas. We were having IPPs, so we were not using NEC contract there, and now we are using all NEC contracts in my current post. Where I struggle a little bit is because the program which is submitted and gets then accepted becomes the baseline, obviously for all the reasons, contractual reasons. But when it comes to performance, like SPI or whatever might be, CPI, anything which is performance related, in theory, you can't have a moving baseline. In a sense, you should have the one at the beginning. But then I often had some discussion with the contractors, well, in this case, as a client, because obviously they relate it to the baseline, which is the last accepted program, whereas I'm still measuring, the classical project control measures with the original one, the first one, which was accepted. Is is it me which I'm missing something, or is the NEC contract actually lacking a little bit the part on the performance part, and it's much more just on the contractual part?
Yeah, great question. And I'm partly surprised I've been asked back between you and I, Marco, because the last podcast I went very controversial with Dale and Val, saying how I didn't like earned value, and there was like a shock horror moment, but I think I recovered. So yeah, and we did touch on this a little bit last time. And look, earned value is a recognized project management tool, a project controls tool, and I'm not going to, earned value has its purpose, and I think when we all talked through, it was like, okay, we're actually more aligned than we maybe sort of sounded from the outset. But to me, it's relatively simple. Now, the solution isn't simple, but the principle is simple, and that is we have two baselines. Now, again, that might shock horror some people. So we have the NEC baseline, which is the last accepted program, and that's the one we're going to assess change against. And then fairly simply, we then have a separate performance baseline to manage our CPI and SPI. And NEC doesn't stop that from happening, and that they can work in relative perfect harmony. And I've just made a note, that is something to have a think about. Within the scope, the client can still dictate that they want to see earned value, and so it can still be part of the contract, but it will be via the scope rather than actually through the contract clauses themselves. But the problem then is obviously, and this is an agile project controls, and this is probably a whole topic on itself, how and when could you update the performance baseline? And that's where you project controls people cause all untold problems. And maybe, Val, the reason you were struggling to get your program out every 4 weeks is you spent so long sorting out your own value, you didn't have time to do the real job, which was actually the actual main program itself.
It's true.
So yeah, it's so when are you allowed to, when are you allowed to change that baseline? And hang on, there was things missing on the original baseline. We forgot to price things. Are we allowed to add that? Compensation event, when do we add those to the original baseline? So it does create, although there's a simple solution, the solution is very technical and very problematic. So you can run your performance baselines in parallel, and then you have the regular problems as to, well, okay, when do we agree when we're allowed to change that baseline? When can we add change in? And those all sort of traditional sort of problems where we have there. So
yeah, because now I was not really going on the earned value, because I kind of have my own opinion on the earned value. But for me, it was just, normally when you need to have something to compare with, independently of what you use as a measure of performance. And clearly, as you correctly said, for me, I always struggle a little bit, because we then set, let's say a baseline, which is the one we measure against. But then the real, for me, problem comes, we are accepting programs, for example, throughout the life cycle. And then normally, when you have a change in scope, for example, you have an extension of time claim, which you agree and you come to an agreement. But then do you just unilaterally change also the performance baseline or not? Which obviously that is not taken care of in the NEC contract itself. So it's more relationship driven between contractor and client rather than actually, contractually written.
Yeah, it is. And it's, so that would be covered within the scope. So there's various things, that the scope would cover that they require, they require the contractor to do. Yeah. And yeah, this sort of performance measurement would be one of those things. So that would run in parallel, not contradicting, but just run in parallel to the actual accepted program process, which we need to be able to assess those compensation events.
So my last question, I will give it back to to Val. It's more a philosophical one, because obviously the whole NEC contract philosophy was, pay now and argue later, basically, when it came out. But actually, what I've seen is that the reality is that it doesn't really remove so much the contention between client and contractor. The only thing which it does a quick fix, in the moment. But I've seen many cases where then at the end, because you still have the opportunity to go in dispute, arbitration, or whatever might be the case at the end. And I've seen a lot of this actually happening. Do you have a suggestion for actually not, trying to reduce this from happening? Because at the end of the day, if I'm just giving a quick solution now, then we'll wait at the end, I pile up all my files, and then I still go for an arbitration or something. then doesn't this a little bit undermine the NEC principles which were set out?
Yeah, I must admit, I've not. So I think, was it you said pay now, argue later? Is that what you said? Or
Yeah, because this was the philosophy at the beginning.
I'm not okay. I've not heard that someone say that. So I'm not sure that's a sort of a widely spouted philosophy or underlying principle, or not really a philosophy, but just how it is. And I think, well, you are right in as much as, well, with NEC, you can go to adjudication at any time. And I think that's more about the sort of legal obligation in the UK, certainly, rather than the sort of NEC philosophy. And certainly the W1 dispute process, I think, tries to bring timely elements along the way, actually more so than sort of in the UK. But I think the project management sort of principle of NEC, I mean, if you take compensation events, the whole idea of compensation events is that we agree them in a timely manner along the way. And there's timescales. So if the contractor notifies a compensation event, it's got to be responded within a week if they agree it. Then there's 3 weeks to do a quote. Project manager's got to respond within 2 weeks. If they don't, you can remind them to chivvy them up. So there is sort of timelines in place for individual compensation events to bring it to an agreement. And when we say agreement, okay, the project manager might assess it themselves, maybe at a lower threshold that the contractor thinks it's worth. And okay, yes, at any point they could still take that to dispute. But I don't know how you'd cut through that, because I think contractually, that is it. A compensation event is implemented, it's full and final. Unlike other contracts where you've got this agreement in principle, and then that is argued at the end, and you really don't know where the heck you are or there. So at least NEC is trying to agree compensation events during the life of the project, so that both parties should know where they are in terms of their liability. If it's option C, where the target is, they then know where their sort of forecast is. And obviously, yeah, if they spend more, and obviously they're going into pain, well, that will sort of be shared accordingly. But I think the mentality of the NEC isn't, well, let's just do a soft pay now and we'll worry about it later. It's actually a lot stronger than that. It's trying to agree change, and it's very, adjudication is not done lightly. You've got to be really sure you're right. You're going to fall out with your client probably. So I don't think that's an almost an assumption that we're going to end up there. And certainly in the UK, very little ends up in adjudication. And I think that's quite sort of testament to itself that normally the sort of processes, one way or another, even if they don't do it at the time, they sort of catch up. The processes normally are sort of followed, because very little does end up formally in adjudication. And you've got the extra step now in NEC4 where we've got senior representatives. So the idea is that rather than if you're the client, Marco, and you've assessed the CE a lot lower than I think it's worth, before we go to adjudication, we'll let our senior representatives have a meet up and see if they can't resolve what we think is an issue, and we'll see if they can resolve it. So senior representatives is another new step process in terms of disputes with NEC4.
That's great, Glenn. Yeah, that's actually a really good idea. And just listening to you guys, we actually did that, I think even before NEC4 let us know. We had someone just managing CEs for us, because the volume that we were trying to push through into the program was massive. And we're like, this is a person's role. It's always been a role, but it was kind of shared across various departments: commercial, project controls, PMO. There's some great insight there. I guess this is a great segue as well to talk about subcontractor programs, the flow down effects. And you mentioned relationships, and I think that it can get tense anyway, contract regardless. What are the problems going into subcontractor programs? Because I don't know all the problems, but I want to know from your experience, Glenn, what are some of the problems you incur on an NEC contract with subcontractors?
Where do we start? When I ask, we go through, so we do the program workshop and we talk about the contractors having problems and produce, even contractors reaching the level of detail the contract requires and getting that program accepted. So we talk about all that. And then I kind of say, right, how are subcontractors? And normally if anyone's microphone's on, there's like, oh, they laugh. Oh, what's that about? Oh, blimey, a subcontractors program, crumbs, that, we don't get those. And I say, right, well, whose fault's that? And they say, oh, it's the subcontractors, they're rubbish, da, da, da. And I said, hang on a minute, who chose that subcontractor? Well, we did. Well, there you go then. So it starts with you. So I get contractors to sort of look at themselves and remind them, you engage with this subcontractor. Now, why don't you vet subcontractors to make sure not only they're the cheapest price, and let's face it, that's probably why you procured them, but it's more than that. We all know that. It's about quality, safety, lots of other things as well, not just the price. So we need to make sure that our subcontractors, if we're a contractor, are under no illusions what the expectations are in terms of program, because the subcontract requirements are exactly the same as the ECC contract themselves. So if you look at the list of clause 31.2, what needs to go into a program, it's the same list, except they're now called the subcontractor, not the contractor. The acceptance process is exactly the same. And then I start saying this to contractors and they say, well, yeah, but they're only a subcontractor. And I say, hang on a minute. First of all, you've got some massive packages that you're letting as subcontracts. And anyway, what we're actually asking a subcontractor for is a program. And I say, right, let's dissect a program into 3 elements. Now, this might not go down well because we're going to simplify programs and everyone's going to be out of job and project controls will fall over because we don't need it anymore. But let's dissect a program into 3 elements. All a program is a list of activities that the subcontractor is going to do. So they've got to come up with a list of the activities they need to do. The next step is to put durations against each of those activities, which it's their job, so they should be able to do that. And here's the crazy 3rd step. Can we just put them in some kind of order that we plan to do them in? Because that's a program. So why are we underestimating our subcontractors that they can't do that? Now they do, they just don't necessarily do it in a decent software and get it on paper. So NEC again is trying to encourage them to do what they should be doing for themselves anyway. And the amount of subcontractors I've helped over the years and produced programs for them, and now they're up and running, they've got their own planners now because they've realized, wow, this is good, and why we were doing this before, and actually the program helps us. Yeah, there you go. So it's the contractors who need to educate the subcontractors to make sure that at tender stage we get a decent program from them, so we know they can produce a program in a decent software. And I do remind them, Excel is not a planning software tool. I'm pretty sure you two will agree with me. So we want something a little more advanced than Excel for their planning software package, and vet their submission, let them know that we're going to score their tender based on the quality of program, and then obviously remind them during the life of the project our expectations of them, that we will be expecting a program that complies with the contract. Give them a sample dummy program of which we're kind of expecting them to do, train them. You know, some contractors get me to come in and do training sessions to their subcontractors. Great, that's enlightening, and it's bringing them along that journey. So rather than moaning about them and complaining about them, educate them, bring them along, and then all of a sudden they'll be motivated and wanting to do it for themselves anyway, and then that's better for the contractor. So it really happens because contractors let them get away with it in the first place. So that's my rant over.
No, that's great. That's great. You've summarized planning down into 3 steps, which would gut any planner listening. No, we get it. We get it. It's fantastic. Look, I think NEC is great. I'd love to see more of it around. I've got a few questions because I'm just curious. Being in Australia, we talked about this as well before we press record. We're just not seeing a lot of NEC contract uptake. Now, there are a few utilities. We talked about water in a few areas, but I'm talking about major infrastructure. Australia is going through one of the biggest infrastructure cycle booms ever. We're spending lots of money on roads, rail, everything. I would love to see more NEC, and I just want to, my question is really, where are we seeing NEC being uptake or matured? Is it more in Europe and the US, or is it somewhere else? How do we get it down Australia as well, as a kind of a lead on question?
Well, I think I know the water sector has woken up in Australia, and they've realised, what NEC can do, and that's being massively used now. And I'd like to hope and think that obviously that will then spread, because it's got to start from somewhere. I mean, your friends over the water there, New Zealand, they're a bit more enlightened because they've been using it for a long time, and they're sort of more widely using it. You've got the likes of Hong Kong, South Africa, obviously out in Dubai, well, when things were sort of busy over there anyway. So it is sort of widely used, and it is increasing use. Not much in America yet. So we've got a few leads and stuff over there, a bit of interest, but a little bit slow still. And yeah, I can't really answer why not. My one cynical answer that it's not been taken up worldwide is because it's a bit fair for some clients. And some sort of clients and cultures won't really be up for that. Well, it should all be the contractor's fault, like the old days. And I'll tell you how much I'm going to pay you and you do it, and don't come and ask me for any more money. So it is a bit more of a different sort of cultural way of being, and some countries' cultures aren't quite ready for that. Now, I wouldn't put Australia in that bracket. So I don't know really why the water sector's embraced it, but not the others so far yet.
Maybe it's just a matter of time. I think, Glenn, I think there's a lot of alliances being contracted here. And I guess the idea of an alliance is to be collaborative as well, working with partners, etc. So NEC, there is a ground for NEC, and I'm hoping anyone listening from Australia get on with it. We need to get a few more NEC contracts down here, and thank you to the utilities companies. The other question I had around that was as well, NEC in itself, I'm surprised no one's kind of built, or maybe they have some software that helps conduce with it. When you roll out a process or a workflow, NEC has workflows built into it. The early warning notices, the change of compensation events. I'm surprised no one's picked it up as a piece of software that you could bolt on to your planning tools and your cost tools or whatever you're going to do. Have you seen any developments in that space?
Funny enough, I was chatting to guys. I don't know if you've heard of RPC over here in the UK. Have you heard of them? So they work. They're one of the Oracle partners. So RPC, and they've got so through Unifier as it's Unifier. So they've got a product which is now sort of taking. You've got these sort of cloud-based tools, the likes of CMAR and things like that do very well the NEC administration tool. But RPC have now sort of developed this tool where it's linking the sort of the P6 Oracle product to the actual workflow of the NEC requirements as well. Now, I've not actually seen that myself, but I know the guys who've been sort of developing it, and so I think finally it looks as though we might have something in that space, and I think you'll probably hear from that literally in the sort of the next couple of weeks. So I know on a personal note, Val, you might be interested in sort of checking that out and seeing how that would work. But yeah, it's not something anyone previously had sort of picked up on. You've got these silos of the program and then the tool. And to be honest, a lot of people have taken these cloud-based tools because they're a bolt-on tool to something else they're using. And normally a bolt-on tool is just that, and it's not really the best tool for it, but it's free and it kind of goes with it. So you think, it must be better to use that. But I'm always a fan of using the right tool for the right situation. But yeah, looks as though we might have something coming that brings those two together finally.
Oh, fantastic. No, that'd be great. I think as well, most tools are built kind of modular and with a vertical kind of delivery, planning, cost. But it seems that my observation is now tools or software companies are recognizing that you have to play nice. So they're starting to swallow their own pill and make sure that tools that don't necessarily from the same enterprise company can actually work together, which is fantastic for projects because we've been asking for it for a long time. One more for me, and then I'll pass on to Marco. Let's talk about NEC 4. Now, I think we did last time you were here, but I think the more we talk about it, the better. And clarity around getting that accepted program assessed. I think there's a bit more clarity in NEC 4 than there was definitely in NEC 3 from my own experience. Do you mind going through that?
Yeah, so it was the sort of problem was how you assess change against the last accepted program. So you had the NEC 3 words that was, well, you use the last accepted program. That's all well and good when you're getting a regular acceptance of that program. But what if that program was 3 months? And, we've been on projects where probably that's been longer, but let's maybe not sort of confess that on air. So some projects go even longer than 3 months, believe it or not, without program acceptance. So if you've now got a compensation event today that you now need to assess against the last accepted program that's 3 months old, okay, do we ignore everything that's happened in the last 3 months, or do we take that into account? More importantly, what are we allowed to do sort of contractually was always the issue. So I remember writing an article way back in 2013 saying this isn't good enough, it needs resolving. Just about, I proved to myself in NEC 3 that yes, you do have to take into account progress and other compensations that happened since the last accepted program. But I did say as well, it wasn't clear enough, and NEC 4 needs to resolve this. NEC 4 came out June 2017, and the words they wrote then didn't solve it. In fact, actually made things worse, very briefly, with the words they added when it first sort of came out. Now, NEC 4 had done so much good, and generally, lots of enhancements, improvements in NEC 4, but this one aspect that I personally was on a crusade to fix hadn't been resolved properly. The authors of the contract did acknowledge the problem because 4 months later, they published a guidance note, and the guidance note was a 1.5-page document basically saying, yes, what we meant by that was you take the last accepted program, bring it up to date with progress and other compensations that happened, since the last accepted program, and then once you've taken that into account, see where you were, and then assess the impact of the compensation event on that. So that was progress. That was a guidance note back in October 2017. But the trouble with guidance notes, you guys probably know, is that people ignore that when they don't like what it says, when it doesn't suit their argument. So finally, in 2019, there was a revision to NEC 4. And whilst there was a few typos and little minor things they corrected, they took the opportunity to add in extra words to clause 63.5, which now confirms in words in the contract that you take into account events. Now, okay, there's a question about events, but basically they mean progress and other compensation events that have occurred since the last accepted program up until what they now call the dividing date. So the dividing date is the switch point between, or when this new compensation events come about, and it now gives clarity that you take the last accepted program, bring it up to date with progress and other compensations that have happened since the last accepted program, see where you were, and save that as a baseline, just to confuse. Let's have another baseline. So that'll be an interim baseline, just to show, well, that's where we were, taking into account the progress, and then plug the compensation into that, and now see the impact on plan completion or any other key dates. So that's been a real journey, because for the industry, I've always campaigned for this, saying, hang on, there's just the rules need to be clear. I almost don't care what the rules are, just make rules clear, because at the moment people make up their own stories as to what it is. So we've now only in 2019 got that final clarity as to exactly what the rules are. Now, it doesn't mean it's straightforward, because okay, you could have lots of compensation events, and hang on, you've got to assess a CE on a CE. So it's not like all of our problems go away, but at least the rules are clear. And I think they're the only fair rules that you could have, because to assess a CE against a program that's 3 months old will have all sorts of problems and issues and be unfair maybe on the client. And I've actually seen scenarios where a contractor was deliberately getting a program rejected because they thought if they had the program rejected, a CE would be assessed against an older program, which didn't show them in delay, and they get a better result. Now, obviously, NEC couldn't be encouraging that, to submit a program to deliberately get accepted. I mean, you'd be horrified, Val, surely, on your watch.
100%, 100%. I think that's a good point, and I'm glad they've clarified that in NEC 4. I just think about the interim baseline that you mentioned there. That kind of pricked my ears. So now we're talking about a third, theoretically, right? A baseline. We probably have more than that in reality. But what happens to the interim baseline once the program is accepted or not accepted? Do you update that? You talked about the dividing date. Does that then get an interim? So let's say it gets not accepted as an aside scenario, and the next month goes, do you update the interim baseline as well? I suppose you do, yeah?
Well, I mean, only the interim baseline is just showing, well, that's where we believe we were, and then this is the extra over effect. So it's only a baseline to basically show and demonstrate what's going within the compensation and quotation. So yeah, as you sort of rightly intimate, it's not going to be without its problems, because, well, hang on, I didn't agree that interim baseline. So I think you were either later than you were running later than you were. But I still think, I mean, if you're showing an interim baseline that, hang on, we were running 2 weeks late, there's an 8-week delay, so 2 weeks is down to us, but okay, 6 weeks should be the CE entitlement. If they look at that and say, well, no, we believe you were 3 weeks late or 4 weeks late, they can still assess it. And they're saying, well, we're only moving the completion date by 4 weeks because we think the first 4 weeks was down to you, and the other 4 weeks, okay, was down to the CE. So you might have some arguments about, well, hang on, were we 4 weeks late or not? But the interim baseline, in inverted commas, is just to show the extra over impact you believe that CE has had. And funny enough, in our LinkedIn group, so we've got this, you're probably aware, a LinkedIn NEC people group. There's over 9,000 people in it, and we're having really sad chats like this live in the group. And that one has just come up very recently in terms of that aspect. And so the question was, should the dividing date be shown on the program? It was only posted a couple of days ago, and it's quite an interesting debate already in there. And my answer was, you don't need the divided date on the program, because all it's doing is separating the forecast defined cost from the actual defined cost. So yeah, you'll show it on your compensation program, but it doesn't actually need to be on the program issued for acceptance. So that debate's going on live at the moment. So we'll see how that sort of falls out from other experts.
Interesting. Marco.
Yeah, sorry if I return back to the acceptance of the program, but this is, I must say, this is for me a little bit of a hot topic, because I've seen, we are, for example, we have some programs where the program has not been accepted for like 4 months. And then there is I'm really curious to see from you that, this in and out, is it a strategy that can be used? Forget about 1 second the philosophy of how it was written, but is it a real strategy that can be used? The fact of not accepting client side, or giving a schedule, a program that that it's not going to be accepted, because it actually can really give you an added value the moment that you're going to, to assess, for example, all the things which have happened in that period of time. And I'm talking about not 2-3 periods, as you are saying. I'm talking about 5-6 periods, which obviously, many things have happened in 6 periods.
We've been, it's an age-old problem, and it's interesting because I've been doing sort of through lockdown. I got involved with SECA over here, and so they're the Civil Engineering Contractors Association, and they look after all the contractors and the subcontractors. They support them. So I've been doing a lot of training for SECA, and we had this initiative where we said, right, let's produce these monthly bulletins. So I do it jointly, GMH Planning and SECA, we publish them together. And each month there's like, it's a bite-sized chunk. They're available on our GMH Planning website, so you can download them for free, all of the previous bulletins. And they're generally about 2 pages long, just going into sort of aspects. And one of the ones I did, it must have been about last June, I think it was number 6, something like that, was the importance of having a regular accepted program. And the importance is for both parties. And I see no benefit to either party as to why you wouldn't want an accepted program every period. I can see some misconceptions why someone think it's in their interest, they want to reject it or not get one accepted, but they're all unfounded. And in this bulletin, and I recommend contractors share this with your client, because they should see why you should want an accepted program every period. And I do sort of challenge project teams. And when you said, Marco, look, it happens. We've gone 4 months, 6 months without an accepted program. I kind of boldly make the statement, and I upset people along the way sometimes, but you've got to give people a bit of tough love. I always say to that project, you have not done enough to get that program accepted. And when I'm talking to the client or the contractor, both look upset. Whoever it is, I say you've not done enough. And if I was a contractor and I'd gone 2 months without an accepted program, I get senior management involved. I'd want their senior management to look at our senior management, talk, and see what we can do to try and get sort of back on track. Numerous times I've been called in to sort of facilitate a meeting between the 2 parties because they've got this disjoint. And normally when you sort of remind them what the rules are and actually what it means if they're accepting a program, and importantly, what it doesn't mean if they're accepting the program, as in they are mistaking the liability they might be signing up to. And all of a sudden, both parties, it kind of frees their inhibitions, and it's like, oh, okay, they kind of relax a bit. And normally we're able to get those parties back on track to getting an accepted program. So I think it's part of it stems from training. It's about getting people to understanding the rules from the outset, that they head off on the right foot. And then it's sort of keeping that going, so that if ever you're out of step, it's putting things in place to let's get back on track. But also the parties need to understand it's in their interest to get back on track and not have that misconception that, brilliant, yeah, if we reject it, it has this benefit to us down the line. There are no benefits. All it does is increase the level of misunderstanding in terms of their liability, and whether completion date will move. Are they overrunning? Will they be liable for delay damages? What should we be liabilitizing? So it shouldn't be in the contractor's interest to allow that to happen either. And sometimes they don't do enough. They reject a program, but then don't chase it up, and then almost resigned. Oh well, the next one's coming. Yeah, we rejected that as well. What have you done about it? Well, we rejected it. Have you brought them in? Have you had a meeting? No. Well, hopefully the next one will be all right, and it isn't. So it's trying to get back on track. And sure, Val's got loads of little techniques he offers people, but it's like, have a review meeting to present the program, either before it's issued or just after. Make sure there's no surprises, present it, get them to challenge it, question it. And so hopefully it can then go in a state that's already well on the way of an understanding, and then it's just fine tuning to sort of get that acceptance. And if it is rejected, there's a nice little line in NEC 4 that says if you're rejecting a submission, you need to state the reasons why. And here's the new bit: insufficient detail to allow the contractor to correct the submission. Now, I call that stating the blooming obvious. You'd like to think they'd always do that anyway. But Val, you must have had it loads of times where they reject for a high level reason and you don't know what's wrong with it. You know, you've rejected my program, it's not realistic. Which bit? It's 4,000 lines long. What is not realistic? So unless you know what's wrong with it, how can you put it right? So misconceptions, and we need to try and avoid those from the outset. And it starts from education, training, and you know, people wanting to understand the rules, not just think they know the rules and play their own games.
I think this is great, because I was really wondering if there was some merit in, you know, certain strategies on, you know, this acceptance of the program, and you were very clear in saying there is actually no benefit from any of the two parties, let's say, in not accepting it.
No.
Okay.
But it needs to, but equally, don't accept rubbish. So yeah, it needs to be of a standard that's good enough to accept, but then the contractor should obviously want to do that. There's no benefit to them in having a program rejected. So all it does is increase the likelihood of disputes.
Yeah. Thank you.
I love that. I love that, Glenn, because yeah, you're right. And 4,000 lines sounds like a small schedule for us. I mean, we were talking about 40, 50, 80,000 line schedules. And unfortunately, when someone says it's rejected, it hurts. And, you know, for all those guys that get a rejected program, when you don't know what the reason are, especially in NEC3, which is where I was working with these programs, it'd be very high level, you know, and you talk about practical realism. Okay, well, what exactly is missing? And some of the challenges are really around changing the program. So if there's something that's not working right and you want to work with the client, I suggested kind of alleviations to this from a problem point of perspective. Was NEC is really about collaboration, right? Because that program is owned by the contractor and the client, and tossing back and forth over a commercial argument doesn't help anybody. It just stalls any kind of progress forward. And I suggested, I think you know this, Marco, a joint PMO, somewhere where the client and the contractor could meet on neutral terms in a safe space, rather than no man's land where we're just tossing things over the fence to each other and watching them explode. And it doesn't really help. And I think what I really liked about NEC, it gave you a reason to kind of collaborate. It has good principles in there, and it allows you to use its levers, if you like, this form of communication through CEs, EWNs, risk reduction meetings, to have those common sense conversations, which I thought were fantastic. Look, I know you get asked a lot of questions, Glenn. I've got some questions about those questions. So what is the most common question Glenn gets asked in this space? Is it around the contract itself? Is it around collaboration? Tell us.
Crumbs. That's a pretty question. I mean, there's such a variety. So, you know, the age-old, in terms of program, the age-old one is, do we show non-implemented compensation on the program? Another one is, if they don't respond to the program, that's deemed accepted, right? No. Now NEC4 has gone one step further. So NEC3, if they had silence in terms of the program response, all you could do was notify a compensation event because they haven't responded, but that didn't help because you couldn't claim money against it. So NEC4 finally, and again, part of campaigning from the likes of myself and other fellow consultants, we've now got this deemed acceptance loop for program, whereby they've got 2 weeks to respond to the program. If they don't respond within 2 weeks, you can remind them in writing they've not responded. And if they're stupid enough to stay quiet for another week, then the program is formally contractually deemed accepted. So yeah, just people think that by not responding, that's deemed acceptance, but it isn't. Another common one, slightly sort of related, is compensation quotation. So when they put their own assumption in a quotation and the quotation is accepted, they think, can we then revisit those assumptions? Well, actually, no, because they need to come from the project manager. So you need to suggest them for the project manager to agree, but it's only project manager assumptions in a quote that can be revisited. The other common question is, what does spirit of mutual trust and cooperation mean that NEC bangs on about? Well, that is our Seeker bulletin, which is actually coming out next week. So if your readers, listeners want to know a bit more about that, well, we've got a bulletin coming out next week on what does the spirit of mutual trust and cooperation really mean. And we've even got Homer Simpson featuring in the bulletin. So I'll leave it at that. But yeah, he's part of our bulletin next week.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Thanks, Glenn. I really appreciate your time today. And before we finish, we've got a little pop quiz. I think you've done this before, but we've changed some of the questions just for your purpose and for everyone listening, a little bit of fun. Are you up for the fiver?
Okay, yeah, I didn't know about this, but let's bring it on.
Nothing like a surprise. We love surprises. Right, let's go. Right, Glenn, early mornings or late nights?
As in, is this late nights?
There we go. What are the 3 must-have behaviors you look for in successful project teams?
Transparency and clarity, honesty, and so transparency, clarity were one. So education is the other one.
Nice. What is the best book you've been gifted?
The NEC4 ECC contract.
Very good. Very relevant. What advice would you give your 10-year-old self?
Crumbs. I don't mind my career, but maybe it was don't go into construction, because working for all of the risks that we do for 3% profit, all the other industries laugh at us. So although I've enjoyed my career, it's like maybe there's another career to get into.
Yes, there is. And then the final one, if you could choose one person to be stuck in a lift with, who would it be and why?
Crumbs. Who would I be stuck in a lift with? That's a tough one. Now that is Boris Johnson, and then I could find out if he really was actually at that party.
Very, very good. Great. Well, look, Glenn, this is we'd love to have you. Obviously, you had the 5 pop quiz. Now you know where it is. We'll change it for you next time you come back. We'd love to have you back. But would you like to leave our listeners with any final thoughts?
Really, it's just don't be afraid of NEC contracts. You know, in our training, it's amazing when we get to the end of a training session, the amount of people that say, "Crumbs, I didn't realize it was actually that straightforward." It's quite easy to you know, when you look at dissect the principles, they're actually quite straightforward, and it is. It really is intended to be straightforward. So I would just share with your sort of viewers, visit our GMH Planning website for all of our sort of bulletins and free guidance, and also our LinkedIn group. So it's called NEC People, Managing NEC3 and NEC4 Contracts. If you've enjoyed the discussions you're having today, you can join them live in the group, and also glean even more information from our sort of website bulletins as well. So no, it's been great catching up with you guys tonight again, and I look forward to my 3rd visit. I must get something for 3 visits, surely.
Yeah, there's a mug in there for someone. I don't know. We'll organize it with Dale. Marco, any final thoughts from you?
No, I find the NEC contracts always very interesting, because there are thousands of questions that they always have, and they read it and read it again. And each time that they read it, there is another question which comes to my mind. So I think it's really good to have this kind of, you know, talks where actually, you know, it's not that complicated, despite the fact that, you know, we still think that it's an incredible complicated mechanism.
Thanks, Marco. Well, look, guys, that's all we have time for. You've heard it. You can pay it forward. You can share the link, and you can get on some of Glenn's LinkedIn pages. A massive thank you to Glenn Hyde and Marco for being co-host with me today. We hope Dale's having fun. Till next time, guys, we say stay safe, be disruptive, and have fun doing it. From me, Marco, and Mr. Glenn, it's bye for now.